What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Rebel Radio. I'm your host, Josh Levine, introducing my new co-host, Mr. Eddie Donaldson, who's joining me on a series we're calling ARTxWORK Rebels, exploring conversations with some of the most important visual artists out today. And this is episode 1 in partnership with Guerilla One. And our guest today, I'm very excited to have TAZ, the man Jim Evans, who's been maybe more responsible than anybody for the visual communication around music for the past few decades. He started out with bands like the Allman Brothers in Chicago, on to Nirvana, the Beastie Boys, Wu-Tang. This man's created hundreds, that's no exaggeration, hundreds of album covers, posters, websites, anything you can think of around music, he's done it. And he's gonna give us some great insights into how you build a career that's that rich and lasts that long and touches that many people, and some words of wisdom about how to stay out of the creative ruts that we all fall into. So I'm very excited to share that with you. And now let's hear from TAZ. But I do want to set us up, because this is kind of a special episode. This is our first, I think we're going to call it the Art Rebels series, hosted in collaboration with Guerilla One.
That's right.
And my man Eddie here. So we go back at least 20 years.
Longer than that.
Longer than that, because I was in college. And I remember coming to the hip hop shop.
Yeah, it's a long time.
What was the shop called?
Odd Spot 23.
So Ron Hill brought me over there.
Yeah,
I was trying to think about how we met.
Were you doing retail?
No, I was doing nothing. I was
You
just
were
like
shopping.
hustling, you know. And no, Ron was doing retail, and I just came
Following.
right
Yeah, I
along,
used
you
to
know,
ride with Gio
learn the
Bivens all the
game
time.
and stuff. And so, but dude, you're like you should be in the dictionary under hustler, because, you know.
Right next to you.
But, you know, you always have just more shit happening, like real projects, you know, more game, more hustle than anybody I know.
I appreciate that coming from you. That means a lot.
No, it's absolutely true. So I'm excited to do this together, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about Guerilla One. And
Well,
what
I mean,
that's
right now,
meant over the years.
kind of Guerilla One's on hold, but as you know, it was the first graffiti website in Los Angeles and probably the third in the world. And it's now gone on to be great things. You know, the seventh letter kind of spawned from Guerilla One. So G1 was the original seventh letter, and then it went to Glass House, and then it went to, I forgot, and now it's seventh letter. So kind of done with that, kind of moving on, still keeping the name alive and using it for events, but not much for it anymore. I'm 47, so it's kind of hard to keep the dream alive.
Yeah, I hear it. But at the same time, you know, it's obviously taking you to a lot of interesting places.
It really has.
And connections. And, it, you know, in this show, you know, we definitely want art to be part of it. And when I started thinking about art and talking to artists, you know, you were the first person.
Yeah, Guerilla One always pops up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, you
gave
definitely
birth to some of these niggas.
Yeah, for sure.
Check that one.
Although not to Taz.
No, not at all.
So
not at all. Definitely grateful to be working with Jim.
G1, Taz, and so maybe, you know, you guys can talk about the collaboration, the stuff you're doing together. But sir, I'm excited to have you here.
Oh, thanks.
Just, you know, seeing your body of work, and you've worked with many of my favorite artists. And so I think, you know, I would describe you probably incorrectly, so you can correct me on it. But, you know, as creative director, art director, designer, illustrator, I think, musician.
Surfer.
Yeah. Photographer.
Just all around
Photographer,
badass.
okay.
Yeah, I shoot pictures too. I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to be a photographer at first, but
Did you?
Yeah, I ended up going into art. I was just a stronger artist
Yeah.
than I was a photographer.
So, but you started out as a musician, right?
I did, yeah.
And so how did that, tell me about, like, I always like to go just back to the very beginning.
Right.
So tell me about your, what music you grew up with, and what was the role that music played in your life?
I came up, I mean, I probably was most influenced in the beginning by Dwayne Eddy and that kind of a sound. Link Ray.
See, what we do is we just pretend like we know, and then we look it up on Google after.
Right.
That's the new shit.
Google it now.
But I mean, it was a reverb drenched sound,
Yeah.
right? And
So it's like surf rock kind of stuff.
well, it was before. Actually, Dwayne
Before
Eddy
that.
and Link Ray were before surf rock, but
Okay.
they brought like Santo and Johnny. I mean, they did
Yeah.
the pedal steel guitars, and,
Yep.
and they had that sound. So it was like a reverb drenched, really cool sound that like bent into surf music. And so I probably came in, maybe I was like 12, 13 years old, and I heard about Fender guitars, and I saw somebody like playing a Fender guitar, and it's like immediately, I mean, I was already a surfer. I mean, I was a young surfer, but it just, it fascinated me. So I wasn't really a natural musician, but I liked the idea of rock music. I was like, I was seduced by just all that reverb and the sounds that were coming. It just seemed like a breakthrough of like unique music all at once, because I went from all the white boy music of the 50s, like everything was like, kind of cookie cutter type stuff, to like you started getting the cooler bands, starting to like I said, Dwayne Eddy and that sort of thing, and Buddy Holly and Link Ray. I mean, really was the first one to like. I mean, I think he recorded Rumble in like a chicken coop with a broken amplifier.
Yeah.
But like as a kid, when you heard that on the radio, you had no idea what it was, except it just seemed badass. I mean, just that sound. So I kind of wanted to do that. So I found like a friend of mine that like his brother played guitar, and I told him just I got a guitar and told him to teach me. So I started a surf band. So my first band was a surf band because
Nice.
it just happened to be all the friends that I surfed with.
Yeah.
What was the name of the band?
Me and the others.
Me and the Others.
That's a great name.
That's right.
That's
Bring
cool.
them back.
And
Kind
how
of
far did that go?
It went pretty far. I mean, I played in a lot of different bands. I made, money as a musician probably from the time I was in ninth grade to first year of college, so like 5 years. And
Great.
I played pretty steady. I mean, I played with my regular guys, but that was like a real band.
Yeah.
With like all the arguments that go with a real band and like all the craziness that goes with a real band.
Yeah.
And we went from like, the surf music to like original songs and actually played like all over North San Diego County. So we had like, we had real gigs. I had, promoters and things like that I made deals with and made money. Then at night I would play with country and western bands to make real money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I actually played with like local country and western bands.
The banjo?
Huh?
Banjo?
No, I played lead guitar, and I would just like fill in. There was I don't know if you heard of Barbara Mandrell.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
course.
Well, she would like went to our high school, and her father
Oh,
owned
wow.
a local music store, so he was always like hooking me up with the guitars I needed and things like that. And he said, you really like, he said, I really dig your band and everything like that. He said, but they're a bunch of losers, man. You really, if you want to make some money, you just like come and like film with my
Kick 'em to
daughter.
the curb.
Yeah.
So I would like go out there and I would just, she was like a one-man show. She played the drums and guitars and things like that. So she was always like a showcase thing. And so I would just like fill in for a missing guitar player or, and they always paid like cash money. I had to wear like a little suit and everything like that.
Uh-huh.
But still, it was.
I want to see pictures of that. Let's use that in the promo for the show.
I think Barbara Mandrell, I think I learned about her on Solid Gold. I think she was a guest
When you
one
were
time or
5.
something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then about the time I guess I was a senior in high school, everything started breaking in San Francisco, and I started seeing the first signs of this. I wouldn't know what you call it. You just call it the new age of everything.
Right.
First of all, you'd hear the sounds. You heard like a band like Moby Grape, and these guys were like on speed playing like lead guitar runs like faster than you've ever heard anybody play before.
Yeah.
And so you're like wondering like what all this stuff is. It seems so different than everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And and I started seeing posters, and like immediately I saw some of these little flyers, and I knew that like something completely different was going on. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before.
Different look.
Huh?
Different look.
Completely different. So
Yeah.
I wanted to integrate that with our band, and so I started doing the posters for the band. I did drum heads and painted guitars and things like that. And they weren't quite into it. They said like you're going to be an artist or a
Whatever.
musician, right?
Yeah.
Whatever, right? And then I actually started doing it for other bands. And so pretty soon I had like a little side thing of like silk screening posters for local bands and things.
Mm.
And I was actually they would have to pay me.
Yeah.
So I was making more money like doing that kind of stuff than I was actually playing with the band, because the band always wanted to buy a new microphone or
Sure.
something like that. So the two things kind of led to this whole coagulation around 1968 with the Vietnam War, and Jimmy's got to go to like he's either going to go in the service or he's going to like just run to Canada or something like that. So I ended up going to art school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do something in order to get some credits, in order to like try to. And I ended up going in the reserves, the Navy Reserves,
Yeah.
in order to keep from being a grunt in the field. But
Sure.
at the same time, I went to art school and I got a job and started doing artwork. And then one thing led to another. Being at the beach and all, I met Rick Griffin at the time, and I'd been doing some like underground comic books and cartoons and things like that, but basically mostly on my own. And I met him, and he sort of took me under his wing and kind of made me his understudy and started getting me jobs. At the same time, I met a guy named Ron Cobb, who's, if you Google him, you'll find out a lot about this particular guy. I mean, he was a well-known artist at the time, and he saw me sketching in a restaurant in Westwood where I worked, and I was like drawing some cartoons, and he came up and he said, "Hey, do you have any more of those?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, I draw like a lot of this shit. I can do it all the time." And he said, "Well, I got like this company called it's a graphic company, and we're distributing cartoons like to underground newspapers, and we need somebody that draws like funky, weird junk like you're drawing there." He said, "Do those things say anything?" I said, "Oh yeah, I got like whole stories and everything like that." So I started putting together some panels and gave it to his company, and they distribute them, and I started getting like shown in the East Village Other and Boston papers all over the country. They were like showing up.
Wow.
So I was sort of like getting distributed without like having any power base at all. They were just like suddenly they were, because they needed people that could do funky cartoons.
Yeah.
And I was like a graphic artist, but I wasn't really very I don't know, sophisticated. My stuff was still kind of funky, and I was trying to get figure out what to do at the same time going to art school. And then I started getting album covers from Rick, and I really couldn't take the time to go to art school. And I figured that it would almost be better if I just cut myself loose and started developing a style, like a funky style. Like I thought, like everything I don't learn might be to an advantage to me, because I couldn't really compete like on the same level as some of the guys I saw. I thought they're like, shit, it's crazy good, right?
Yeah.
So I thought I'd just keep my funkiness and just keep refining it, and it worked out pretty well. And,
So hearing you talk about it, you make it sound like, one thing, like shit just happens, right?
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, that's great. At what point was there a plan? Like were you thinking I'm going to be a musician for my career, and then it just sort of shifted gears? But like, how conscious were you of like what kind of career path you're going down?
I mean, from an emotional aesthetic viewpoint, I would rather be a musician. I enjoyed music more than I enjoyed like sitting in a dark room doing artwork. I mean, I like jamming with people and things like that.
And did you have thoughts that that was a real career option?
Yeah. I mean, I played with a lot of good people. I mean, it towards the end, when I realized that like art was like taking up a lot of my time, and I had a kid, and I had a wife, and I had to make some money, and so art was the one thing I could actually make money like pretty quickly. Whereas music, I would still play with people and I could make money, but usually I would tie myself to somebody big and like fill in as a rhythm section, or like just make someone else look good. Yeah. So that was like kind of towards the end. That was kind of where I went. And then I think I tried out for a band called Pacific Gas and Electric. They were like looking around for guitarists, and I got beaten up by Randy California, I think, or somebody like that. And I mean, it was like one of those kind of things to go see, where you just set up your guitar and you start playing with the band. And I was like pretty good at the time, but the guy like blues were like really starting to happen in a big way. And the guy, like, when he finished, he said, "Wow, you're like the best psychedelic surfing guitar player I've ever heard of." He said, "But like, we're not looking for psychedelic surfing guitar." I mean, now I can start a band just with that alone, right?
Yeah, sure.
Don't you have a band now? You and Ned?
No, we just do the stuff in the background, But
What do you
it was like at the time it was kind of an insult. I thought like, wow, I haven't even lost that. It's like still stuck with me.
Yeah.
I crank up the reverb, and everything I did had that's still that same sound, that Dwayne Eddy twang to it.
Yeah.
And in the early 70s, that really wasn't like what anybody was looking for. So I just like gave it up. And I got a sitar, and I went to like Ravi Shankar's school.
You're kidding.
And I learned to play the sitar.
Wow.
And I thought like, if somebody needs a sitar player, I'll just like fill in. So I actually played in the background with a couple of different groups, just playing sitar for a while. And then
what is a sitar?
Eddie, when's the last time you hired a sitar player?
I don't even know what a sitar
event?
is. What is a sitar? Is that really long?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an Indian guitar sort of.
Yeah.
Right.
And then when you go to something like Ravi Shankar's school, you learn to sit. I mean, you spend like probably the first 3 months just sitting.
Bet.
In the pose.
Right.
Yeah.
And then of course, as soon as you start playing or something like that, the guy keeps coming and grabbing your shoulder and says, "You're a guitar player. You keep playing like a guitar player. Stop playing like a guitar player." I'm like, "That's gonna hurt. You keep doing that to my shoulder." So that was that. My music career just kind of faded off, and then I went to Hawaii, and art became like everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always like, that's probably what I mean. If you say like what was the lingering effect of my music career would be the fact that I immediately got involved in rock music.
Yeah,
Right.
music
Doing
posters.
and
Yeah.
and things like that. So I
And
always
was
got
that
along
so?
well
Was
with
that
musician.
was that intentional, or did it just happen?
It just happened. That's kind of where I went.
Yeah.
I mean, artistically.
Yeah.
I mean, my style came from underground comics, so it had. And I guess when I
What
went
were
to-
the comics that you grew up reading or being influenced by?
I mean, when I was a little kid.
Or just that,
Mad
like,
Magazine probably
Okay.
would be the biggest influence that influenced me. And then, I mean, I read Superman and,
Yeah.
and all the comics, but I would say that if
But
I
what would you say was like the kind of open your eyes to like underground comics? Because that's a bit of a different world.
Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, stuff that like bubbled around in my head that like when I got into underground comics, I understood like immediately sort of. I mean, when I saw the first underground comic book, I sort of saw what those guys were doing. I thought like, wow, they just like dropped acid and it scrambled their brains, and like all that shit that they saw when they were little kids just bubbled up, and they've like refined
Illustrated it.
and
Yeah.
illustrated it.
Do you remember that shit, man?
What?
Like I grew up like I wasn't into it, but there was kids in my class that had like Freak Brothers.
See, I wasn't
And-
into that. Never was exposed to it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm from Kentucky, so it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
a big.
Yeah, I grew up in
thing
San
that
Francisco,
we
so it was a
were-
little
yeah,
that
we
stuff was
weren't-
around, you know.
We weren't too hip.
One kid had on the school bus, like one kid had a Penthouse,
Well,
and the
we
other
did have
kid
that. We did have
had
that.
Freak Brothers. And you're like, who am I going to sit next to today? Like, you know,
Penthouse
usually
wins every time.
Usually,
Yeah, it wins every time.
I mean, the idea of it at the time, it was hard to imagine. Like, it's hard to go back to like what was happening at that time, because you came out of the 50s and you had the early 60s, which are kind of like the backwash of the 50s.
right?
But then right after Kennedy's assassination, what I would say was like the underground in a big way, like sort of came into being. Like you started seeing like articles, like really weird articles written by really good underground writers and things like that, like skewing reality in a whole different way. And then when comic books came along and the underground comic books, it skewed the comic book reality in a whole different way. So the subversion of that, like what it did and what it led to in pop culture, was pretty huge. I mean, it really made a big difference. I mean, it was like seductive and different, and it was like taking the piss out of like consensual culture in a way that those people couldn't even understand. Of course, towards the end, I mean, Playboy magazine like took all the underground cartoonists and like put them all together in a magazine. I did like a surfing comic book with Rick Griffin and in Surfer magazine. We had Robert Crumb and all those guys.
Oh, cool.
In Surfer?
In Surfer.
How old is Surfer? It's been around that
Surfer's
long.
been like since 1962.
Wow.
This comic book was done in like 69, 70.
Wow. What was it called?
Tales from the Tube.
Cool.
Tales
That's
from
awesome.
the Tube.
Yeah.
All right.
And that was, and then the underground stuff with the Freak Brothers and stuff like that sort of like lingered on into the 70s, but then it was pretty much over. It was sort of like Woodstock versus, the Monterey Pop Festival. Like the Monterey Pop Festival was really a thing.
Right.
But Woodstock, like if you'd went to the Monterey Pop Festival, which I did, then by the time Woodstock came along, it was like all that stuff was pretty much over. You're really looking at like the backwash of like sort of what's left, or like a next generation of people
Yeah, so
getting into
That's
the
interesting.
mainstream version.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, who'd you see at Monterey Pop?
it. Jimi Hendrix,
Yeah.
Jeez.
and Ravi Shankar.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
How was that show?
I mean, it was what I had done is I'd met this girl and we went to see we went to see a big show at the Whiskey. I'm trying to think of who it was. Otis Redding, and we were leaving there. There was like a big fence that was like on Sunset Boulevard, and it had like the names of like all the San Francisco bands and things like that. So as I'm driving down to the end of this thing, I'm going, holy crap, what is that? It's just like, not only that, but all the cool English bands. I mean, all the greatest bands you'd ever imagine,
Yeah.
but fresh right then and there.
On one billboard.
And then at the end, it had like a phone number, So I like wrote down the phone number when I got home. I called up a phone number, and they only had tickets to the Hendrix show and Ravi Shankar. So I just bought tickets to those things.
Yeah.
So then we drove up to San Francisco, went through Big Sur, and we went to Monterey and basically spent the week there, going to the festival, but only able to go to those two shows. But like seeing those two shows, and then afterwards, and I didn't know really what Hendrix would be about, because Hey Joe was on the radio, and I thought he was
Right.
kind of a funky, sort of heavy, like folk guy or something like that, based on Hey Joe. And then of course being there that night and like seeing that performance. I mean, you've seen the
Way
performance,
more
right?
than
Yeah,
that,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're looking around everybody, and everybody's like mouths hanging open. So then I thought,
Yeah.
damn. And then I heard he was playing in San Francisco at the Fillmore. So then we drove up there to stay there
See
and
him again.
meet some of my friends. And I went to the Fillmore and saw him play there. And it's I mean, in those days you could actually walk up to the front of the stage.
Sure.
Everybody else is dancing around, eating apples and dropping acid, and you just sit like, he's here, and you're like sitting there, and I'm just watching him. it's like play. So then I went home and told the band about, what I'd seen. And I was trying to I was saying, we really got to get it together.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to describe this guitar player. I said, the guy plays he plays backwards. And I said, I don't think he doesn't reverse his guitar or his strings. I said, so he plays the strings upside down. And I said, I can't guarantee that he ever actually tunes his guitar.
Right.
I said, it looked to me like he just bends the strings into tune the way when he plays,
How about this? You're in a band and the dude comes in, he's like, yo, we got to get like Hendrix.
That's
and then and then Are You Experienced album came out, and I threw it down and I said, that's the look. And they're going, whoa, what's that? Man, that guy's dressed like a girl.
So much. That's crazy. I would have loved to have seen Jimi Hendrix.
Anyway, so it was those kind of things that were happening at the time that kind of galvanized, in your mind. And of course, on the way up there, I saw Blow Up.
Yeah.
That movie about the photographer in London.
Yeah.
So then I had to get my camera, and I thought, man, that's sexy. That's that's what's going on in London, Remember it had the Yardbirds in there.
Yeah.
Playing at the club.
Yeah.
It had Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids were standing in the club going like this, right? And they're watching these guys tear their guitars apart. And they hadn't, and those, nobody had any idea what was going on. They were just okay.
Yeah.
This is not danceable.
Does that happen, do you think? Still?
What?
Can you get up on stage and just completely blow people's minds with something that they've never seen before?
I suppose you could, but it would be harder than it was then. None of it was easier just because there was, when you look at the time frame, say if you look back in time and you see what I'm talking about, sort of the early 60s, it was still pretty slow, right?
Yeah.
And then the Beatles came along, with their thing, and then, they went from zero to like psychedelic, minstrels in 3.5 years?
Yeah.
So things were pretty compressed at that time. Even the Beach Boys went from what they were into complete acid heads and doing their Good Vibrations. So everything was pretty different. So people were going up on stage and doing things that were, demonstrably hadn't been done before. Even Jim Morrison. Now you've seen a billion people have imitated him, but when he first stood on stage with his leather pants and doing his whole shtick, it looked pretty different.
Yeah.
Because you hadn't seen anybody really act like that before.
Well, I guess modern day is Daft Punk, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
That's the biggest thing to freak people out.
Yeah, I find that
do it anymore.
That's a great point. I find that really interesting that we can look back throughout history, whether it's Elvis, the Beatles, Eazy-E, Ozzy Osbourne, right? There are these times. Sex Pistols, people talk about that show.
Right.
That one night in London or in Manchester, right? And where something that's never been done before happens for the first time, and there's a small group of people that see it,
and then the rest of the world hears about it.
Over time, right? And and I wonder how much of that is left for music, right?
None. Festivals, everybody gets to play and see everything.
When you think about it, it's got to be possible
online.
again, just because no matter what anybody's done, there's got to be something that everybody hasn't seen before or nobody expects. The fact is we become jaded, thinking wow, we got all this stuff, and how can you surprise me?
Better?
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody will come along and surprise us, right?
Yeah.
When you think about pop music, it's almost like there was an explosion in the late 40s. You had Frank Sinatra, and then you got the Elvis thing, and you got all the white boys and stuff like that, and then the English invasion, and they reintroduced America to black music and brought that back, and then the whole thing combined into a really sort of cool, really hot center right about the mid 60s. Around 1970, if you look at the charts in 70, you can see every month there were great albums put out by everybody, every kind of music,
right,
all together. From Sabbath to Funkadelic, Parliament Funkadelic, right? And then everything in between. Simon and Garfunkel.
Sure.
There's not a single genre in 1970 you can think of that wasn't touched. Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
So you had soul music, you had, everything.
Music was banging.
I always say 70s was probably the white heat, and then everything began to cool off after that. You've had you've had the punk, and had
hip hop,
new wave,
hip hop was an explosion.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
hip hop has probably
social
continued on
explosion.
longer than almost anything. In terms, I was talking to him today, I said right now hip hop is probably the voice of American politics in terms of making a sound that people need to hear.
You got Killer Mike on
Killer Mike's a factor in
Yeah,
this
man.
in this election.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then Beyonce goes on the Super Bowl halftime and rechannels the Black Panthers. Everybody's
And
we're the Black
Kendrick's
Panthers, right?
killing it. Kendrick's killing it too.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Yeah,
Anderson
absolutely.
.Paak?
Yeah.
You like Anderson .Paak? He's killing it.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, I maybe for both of you, I'm curious what music is impacting you today. Like, I'm sure you stay in touch through your work, right? With what's happening.
This guy knows more about music than anybody I know. I mean, his playlist in the car, I couldn't even believe it. We drove to Coachella. I'm like, what are you doing listening to this shit? He's hipper than I am.
So what's new music that still has an impact on you?
I would say rap and hip hop right now probably has the biggest impact on me in terms of, like, you know, listening to new things. I mean, I like War on Drugs, but at the same time, I can't say there's anything new about it. I mean, it's like everything I've ever heard, like, put together into like a really nice package that I really enjoy listening to. But at the same time, it's like there's not like a single guitar lick or like even vocal phrasing that hasn't been done before. But the guy does it like so well.
Yeah.
You know, that I really like it.
Yeah.
I like Kendrick Lamar a lot.
I like Royal Blood. You seen those kids?
No.
Two brothers from Australia, New
Yeah.
Zealand. Two guys.
Okay.
A drummer and a guitar player. Sounds like a 5-piece band.
Really?
Yeah, we saw him with Raymond at Coachella.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty good.
I like Run the Jewels a lot. I guess if I were to say all my best bands, it would be like, you know, Run the Jewels, Kendrick Lamar, Anderson .Paak, those kinds of bands.
Mm-hmm.
So I listen to that a lot.
Interesting.
And I still listen to, rock as often as I can, but it's not as much that I like there. I mean, I find myself listening to like 10-year-old Queens of the Stone Age. I still like that.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely listen to classic rock more than anything on my Spotify.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What's heavy rotation?
I mean,
What's
Spotify, you can pick anything you want.
What's the song that, like, you know, when you?
I don't know. Yesterday was Steve Miller Band.
Okay. Fly Like an Eagle.
Supertramp.
Okay.
Peter Frampton.
I
try to get weird with it because you can on Spotify. It's like you can just pick a name and play it.
Yeah, sure. I saw Steve Miller Band not that long ago. It was like a corporate gig, so it's kind of, and he was like
Corny.
He was bitching about the sound and
I'm
that,
sure.
but he got totally upstaged by the Go-Go's, who opened for him and murdered it. And they
Recently?
Yeah, it was like 8 years ago.
We saw Steely Dan.
And they like, I mean, it was, you know, it was cool because you were seeing Steve Miller in a private show, but the Go-Go's were like,
crushed it.
blew it away.
Right.
60 years old.
Yeah, just, you know, it's still beautiful and just murdering
Going
it.
for it.
Yeah.
Probably one of the saddest things about American music is the lack of jazz or the love of jazz. I mean, I've always liked all the Blue Note stuff. I mean, I still listen to jazz a lot, but it's mostly old jazz. It's not that much new jazz that I find. And that's one of the things I like about Kendrick Lamar, because he introduces jazz like in a way that nobody else has into his pieces.
Absolutely.
I mean, and so I think it turns like a whole new generation on to like what a jazz sound is, like the weird syncopations and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened for me. I'm a huge jazz fan, but I learned about that through hip hop, right? Like, you know, it's because I was listening to records and it was like, started understanding about samples, and then you go back, you know,
dig in the crates.
Talk to the dude at the store, what's that sample? And then take the record home and spend the night with it, you know.
Well, that was what's interesting about the 70s. Like, if I say that rock music and stuff like that, I thought like kind of peaked a little bit in the 70s. Jazz like kind of took off with fusion jazz. I mean, you had like Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis doing Bitches Brew and all that sort of thing. And then the Weather Report basically just redefined like the whole idea altogether. I mean, they put everything together into this beautiful sound. And of course, had some of the best musicians of all time playing it. Mm-hmm. So I think that jazz was, jazz really. I mean, it didn't develop anywhere beyond that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So I want to talk about the art stuff though, because I think you have. You've been a big factor in taking everything that we're talking about, all that energy, and all of these nuances that are created in music, and then turning those into visuals, right? And so whether it's album covers, logos, posters, websites, right? Like you've sort of taken. I was thinking about it this morning, and like I almost think of you as sort of a remixer, right? Because you're taking someone's creation and you're translating it. It just happens to be into a different medium than what they created in. So I guess my question is how much, maybe tell me about the process you go through and how much of what we see in your creations is yours versus the artist's.
That's interesting. I mean, a lot of artists that I work closely with, of course, have ideas that they want.
Yeah.
So one when I've worked with some artists, they've said specifically that they want a certain kind of a thing. They want themselves standing in it, floating over the desert with their guitar in their hand, and like a desert sunset and all that sort
Who
of
was
thing.
that?
So, huh?
Who asked for that?
That guitar player from the Doors, what's his name? Doors guitar player.
Guitar player?
Huh?
Oh no.
Yeah, Doors guitar player. Anyway,
I know Jim
after
and
the
Ray.
Doors broke up, I did his first album, and he.
Okay.
So basically, I took him into the kitchen, stood him up on a chair, and took a picture of him. I mean, when I need a picture, I took a picture. So a lot of times I use photography to get what I needed.
Sure.
I would say that most of the time, the artist likes you to interpret what they say or interpret their music.
Yeah.
But I would say in the earlier days, like in the 70s, more often than not, artists like something really, really specific.
Mm-hmm.
Although, like I did the Allman Brothers, I did a double package for them, and they just gave me the title.
What was it?
And you ran with it.
Dollar Gas, Wash the Windows, and a Bit of Oil, or whatever it is. It was like a really long title.
Yeah.
So I did like the front of an old-time gas station, And then
Nice.
you folded it out. I had
Keyed in
guitars
the
like in the
words.
car, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When
So
we
it
were
was double
talking to
fold out.
Paul, you said that when you do the prints, you just kind of force your image on some of the bands or some of the shows, right?
I mean, recently, it seems like none of the artists really care what you do as long as you do something interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
Right. So then it became like, I would say that in the early 90s, almost everything I did, the band just let me do whatever I wanted to do.
And so is that because you became more prominent and had more authority, or is it because like the nature of digital music distribution, does that change the role of the art, or why do you think
I think
that
the
happened?
bands in the 90s, which we'd call the alt bands, I guess, were more collaborative in terms of like they liked to work in collaboration, whereas the earlier bands were more egotistical in terms
More
of
direction,
branding
yeah.
and their look and their feel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They wanted like a certain kind of a thing, and they wanted, if they wanted a fisheye lens, they wanted a fisheye lens, right? They didn't want like, to do something completely different. They really wanted like really specific kind of things all the time.
What about when they're wrong?
Do you
That's
tell
it.
them?
Huh?
Do you tell them, or do you let them hang themselves?
I don't know. I've seen bands be really wrong. I saw Rick Griffin did a job for Steppenwolf one time, and he did what I thought was like his best piece. I think it's still his best piece. And he did it for the cover, and he turned it in, and they put it on the inside, and they put like just a picture of the band on the outside because they just thought it was too weird.
Too much.
And I said, like, how can it be too much for Steppenwolf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen like a lot of really good art just turned down.
Yeah.
I've had my own art turned down. I've had like whole things completely done, printed up, put in the factory, and never released.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did one for a band called Dusty Drapes and the Dusters, and the album got printed and everything and never got released.
Yeah.
I've also done like things where the record company, I would say in the 70s, the record companies had their own ideas and the artists had their own ideas. So a lot of times they would hire me to do 2 album covers. And
Right.
a lot of times the artist album cover would never get done because the idea was that they would send me over to his house. He would tell me what he wants. I would try to do what he wants and get it through sketch stages. And then they would tell me what they were going to do, without telling him.
Mhm.
And then I would, or her,
Right.
and then I would do like a one for them, but I would do it more finished.
Yeah.
Right? And so then they would have meetings and things like that and say, well, we're really going to go with this one instead of this one, even though that was your idea. So the idea was to like give him a choice, knowing
Without giving
that
him-
without giving him a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Just appease the
So
artist.
probably happened about half a
it
dozen
sounds like you're
times.
pretty collaborative with the artist, right? Like you're spending time with them in person and
Sometimes, right?
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of times.
Sometimes you don't even see them, right? It's a manager you talk to.
Right.
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 Sure.
The managers can become even harder.
What's been the most interesting of those interactions in terms of like someone having ideas that really inspired you?
I enjoyed working with Neil Young on Rust Never Sleeps, just because he let me do everything on it. Although he was like way more specific than I'd want him to be, but at the same time, like working with him was fun because he was a real collaborator.
Yeah.
Except that he had an idea that I thought was pretty funky at the time, and I thought, like I really want to do like a really cool Neil Young album cover, and he had this idea of like sort of this Jawas. Raising a microphone over Iwo Jima or something like. Anyway, Rust Never Sleeps. If you ever saw the poster, it's like little Jawa characters, like in the raising a microphone.
Okay.
And he's like standing up on the guitar cases or music cases, and he's like playing his guitar. So he looks like the wind is blowing
You
on
did
him.
that?
Huh?
You did that?
Yeah, Rust Never Sleeps. And then I did
I mean,
the
the names just keep coming.
and I did the
Yeah.
the titles for the movie
We'll be
too.
here all day with
Yeah, the
that.
Beastie Boys are like low on the list here, I guess.
I mean, the Beastie Boys is probably the most complete collaboration of all time. But then,
What'd you do with them?
Ill Communication.
Okay.
You remember
And I
what it
think-
looked like?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And that was
Pretty
an interesting one
impressive.
because Mike D, like he came in and I don't know where he got this idea, but just like out of the blue, he said, can you do like that architectural lettering, like they do in high school, like drafting class?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just so happened, and I was like, this is like something that I still actually did at the time
Yeah.
because I always dug that lettering. And so I lettered out his name and I lettered out the Beastie Boys name and all this stuff. He's like, that's exactly what I want. He said, can you create an alphabet like that?
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to like set all the type in the album cover. So that's sort of where it
Lyrics.
started.
That's
Then it
cool.
started out as kind of like a Miles Davis Bitches Brew kind of look
Mm-hmm.
and morphed beyond morphing into like all manner of things. I mean, there was a point where I was up snowboarding in Mammoth and I got a call from him and he wanted a dog in a phone booth with a Superman cape on. And he said he just needed it sketched, and could I sketch it out and just fax it down to L.A. because that was like an idea.
Yeah.
And so I'm up in Mammoth, so I'm like looking for a fax machine up there. And
You drew it?
Yeah.
Oh,
drew it,
okay.
sent it in. Anyway, we ended up with the one you see where like the little guy with the at that squawk box or something like that, or
Yeah.
a fast food
Drive-through,
or something like that.
Yeah.
And now you and Mike D are neighbors, right?
Yeah.
You see him in the water ever?
Never. No. But it was that was interesting. I mean, we did so much work for that thing that we couldn't even turn in the art. We just sent an entire hard drive at that time over to the record company and just
Yeah.
said, there you go.
Go
It's
for it.
got everything on it. It's like if you want to make changes, it's like every iteration of the album.
Right.
I mean,
Just-
there's like 30 album covers on there.
Wow.
Go crazy with it.
That's cool. That's so cool. Wait, was there a time when you sort of realized the impact that your art was having? Like you're out in the streets and you see somebody wearing a T-shirt, or you see, was there a moment for you where that kind of struck you?
The oh wow moment.
I mean, in the beginning, my stuff got distributed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And really, that was my only goal. I was I didn't really want to be a fine artist very much, and I kind of punished myself by being almost a complete commercial artist, just concentrating almost solely on commercial art.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted my stuff to be seen like a Coca-Cola sign or something like that. I always admired that as a kid. I saw that lettering on the Coca-Cola sign, I kept thinking, wow, who did that? I wonder who did that. So
Mhm.
I really want people go through life wondering who did this and who did that. So once my stuff got hung in record stores, I mean that
Yeah.
was pretty much, I'd already reached my first goal.
What was the first thing you saw in the record store?
The Alice Coltrane album,
Mm.
her first album.
So you walk in a store and it's hanging on the
And
wall.
it's on the shelf.
Like, hey,
There it
that's
is.
me.
Right.
So you know he did Lollapalooza too, right? So he did
Okay.
the huge stage. So it's like how tall were those 20,
30 feet tall.
30 feet tall characters that Jim did?
Yeah.
But seeing the stuff all through the 70s, it was like that because everything I did a lot of T-shirts. And when I went to Hawaii, I did nothing but T-shirts and posters and things like that. So everywhere I went, my stuff was. So I pretty much achieved my goal, right out of the box. It wasn't
Yeah.
like I felt wow, people kind of think I suck and they're not really paying any attention to me.
Right.
I thought and then I saw the residual aspect of it was the fact that once people saw something, they wanted something more like that.
Yeah.
And it became its own self-fulfilling prophecy. Say for instance, if I did a skateboard poster with a cowboy on it, and then suddenly I got country western album covers and all sorts of things. So my
Yeah.
rep would be getting they go, hey, people want more of this that old time cowboy thing, and so I did a lot of old time cowboy stuff, and it was just because I had driven by a sign for a Orange Crate sign, and I really liked it a lot. So I did the skateboard poster. I wanted to do Orange Crate, California, and I thought what would be old California? I thought, Tom Mix or some cowboy, with a big hat, the friendly cowboy,
Yeah.
holding a skateboard like that, with palm trees behind him, and everybody liked it.
Yeah.
But it was I just did it because it kind of fit that Orange Crate label look.
So it's funny, because it sounds like, you can sort of manipulate people's tastes, right? By showing them stuff that they react to. Are you then conscious of that in your process? I'm going to create this because I want to do more of it, or I'm not going to create this because I don't want to.
Don't
No,
wanna do
more
I
of
mean,
that.
yeah. Once I saw the how it worked, I became very conscious of it.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of philosophy at one time, and I put a lot of philosophy into the work, ideas of using color to manipulate people, using design to manipulate people, or causing people's eye to fall, where I wanted it to. And I found that I could, like a graphic magician, I could do what I wanted to do. Like I could make people see what I wanted to see. So eventually that became like kind of important to me.
Yeah.
Like I would design a concept, and I wanted, like, you know, if I wanted to focus like right on one spot on the page, that would be like all I would concentrate on, is like doing that, like
Sure.
through the manipulation of color and form, and like, you know, fading, or, you know, things being more in focus. And it'd be like, you know, painting. I could paint a hand, and like, you know, the tips of the fingernails. You know, you'd have to look at that because there was something in that hand, right? And then the face would be over here, and I knew that I could do that, and that really became one of the things that drove me to create more things like that. Yeah. So I went from one thing to another like that.
Does it ever go wrong?
Yeah, I think at the end of the 70s I started getting too tight. Yeah. I mean, so then we lead into a whole other area where it's like my sense of precision like got so precise that, like, I was telling Risk that we were talking about like forms and like doing letter forms and things like that. I said I got to the point where I bought like every French curve. I mean, old French curves like swap beats and things like that. That I had to believe that if I couldn't find the curve on a French curve, that I wouldn't use that curve. So, like, for instance, I was doing like the lettering for Chicago for their album cover for the Hot Streets. Where they
You did the logo, right?
Yeah, the logo. Where they did neon logo.
Yeah.
I mean,
Cool
this thing was
band,
only going to appear on the album about this big.
Yeah.
But I drew it like this big. I mean, it was a big, and then like every arc on there was like French curved. I mean, first of all, I would draw it out by hand. Right?
Yeah.
And then I would go in there with French curves and try to find every curve. And if I couldn't find a curve, I would redo the curve to make it you know. So it became like rules almost, like my own personal rules, building a habitat for myself. So I think at the end of the 70s, I was getting just tight. You know, it's like it was too perfect. I couldn't break out of it. That's when I got into the thing with Richard, and when he
Eduardo?
started,
Yeah.
and he was much looser, and he actually loosened me up a lot in
Yeah, I
terms of
bet.
like, you know, saying, you know, if he found out I didn't like a color, then he would use that color, you know. And with the collaboration, so it was like a band collaboration where we were
That's
like,
a great partnership.
What
Yeah.
a jerk.
he's going like, what chord
like
don't you
pink,
like? And I say,
everything's pink.
I really hate A minor. He's like, well, let's make this song A minor. So, I mean, after a few years with him, that was a really good thing for me, because it took me from that, because I couldn't get away from it. It was sort of like I'd gone as far as I could, and I just couldn't take that one thing any further.
Yeah.
So then when I did the rock posters in the 90s, you know, well, 89, 90, I went back to the comic book style that I did like in 69, and I tried to draw like kind of unsophisticated, you know, like I did then. First of all, simple. I brought out my brushes, and I did like, you know, brush stroke shading and things like that. So I limited myself in terms of like what, you know, I could do.
How hard is it to go back?
I find it, at first I found it hard, then I find it easier and easier. Yeah, I think that any artist, especially fine artists, you want to go back. I mean, you want to go back. You can't like help but to think about when you were a child, like 5 or 6 years old, when you would sit on the rug, you know, and you get a bowl of grapes or something like that, and you'd have like a little piece of paper, and you were like drawing tanks and airplanes and things like
Muscle
that.
in.
Yeah, and all the things that you really enjoyed. Like, you really want to get back to like how excited you were about like making that little war scene work or something like that while you're watching television, you know. So you definitely want to get back to, you don't want to get more sophisticated, you actually want to get less.
Yeah.
Because your techniques are like riding a bicycle. I mean, I could literally paint or draw almost anything I wanted to in almost any medium that I wanted to, but why would I want to?
Sure.
You know, you got to have a reason to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, you know, I ask because I think for a lot of artists, you know, musicians or visual artists, right, you kind of start out and then something connects with an audience, and then that becomes the trajectory for everything else you create, right? We've seen that a lot in music where, you know, you have this one hit and then everything else sounds like
Trying
that.
to follow it, yeah.
And where maybe before everything didn't sound like that, that was just one thing they were doing. I think in a lot of cases that wasn't the intention, right? It just sort of happened.
Right.
But then, you know, you get stuck in that.
In the rut. Trying to recreate, right?
That's the biggest problem. I mean, you put your finger on the biggest problem. I mean, any musician or artist, and there's a lot of them, get stuck in that rut.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known a lot of people that have done it. They just, you know, they do one thing and then everybody likes it, and then they just keep doing that thing over and over again until finally
Until it's burnt.
Until people
and then
stop
they're
liking
gone.
Yeah, until
Yeah.
they didn't get arrested for doing it anymore, right?
Yeah. And so how do you keep yourself out of that?
It's been easy for me just because I get bored really quickly. Like, I mean, I get bored with myself. So it hasn't been difficult for me and I've tried, I've jumped for. I mean, when you look at what I've done, I've jumped pretty successfully from one thing to another, like going from like really funky underground cartoons to pretty sophisticated album covers and high-end advertising. I mean, by the mid '70s, I was doing advertising for Chai at Day and all those things. So what I did was, I had like sort of this weird moment when I was in Hawaii where I brought in all my cartoons and this advertising agency like had called me in because they'd seen the cartoons and there wasn't that many people in Hawaii that did that kind of thing. And they asked me to do they said, could you do like little funny airplanes, like flying over pineapple fields on the islands and stuff like that, and then we just put our logo on it. And I said, yeah, I mean, I could do that. And it's like, okay, so we'll pay you like $5 for it. And I was thinking, because I used to get like $500 for like a full comic book,
right?
Maybe $250 for a
they gave you
a T-shirt. They gave me like $5,000 for drawing like a little, like a little cartoon airplane.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, in my head, I'm thinking this is like free money.
You're like, we need to do more of this.
Sure.
I said, so you want a little cartoon airplane and you want like little cartoon pineapple and things like that? And
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Had you always wanted to do brand stuff, advertising, or was that like? Was that a compromise for you, or was it an opportunity that you were excited about?
That was another part of my punishment of myself, because I had grown up on really sophisticated advertising in the '60s, and also in the '60s, advertising illustrators and type designers and things like that were probably the most left-wing, outspoken purveyors of like politics in America.
Sure.
I mean, you had Milton Glaser and Seymour Quast and all those guys like doing all these different magazines and posters and things like that. So I saw like these guys like putting really sophisticated work, which I saw like almost hypnotic type work. I mean, these guys were like masters of imagery, and they were like telling people what to think and what to say and how to think. And I thought, I like that idea, the idea of like propaganda. So I saw my work as kind of propaganda of like what goes on in my mind, like my viewpoint, and I could like getting it out through advertising and things like that would just be another way to get it out. Like, for instance, if they'd hired me to do like cartoon characters, I could like, cartoonize like a whole thing that normally hadn't been cartoonized before, and that kind of pleased me. I like that idea. But I had been very influenced by advertising in the '60s. I mean, seeing like, there was that was probably the golden age of advertising.
That's the Mad Men, right?
Yeah, the Mad Men.
Yeah.
Mad Men era.
And so, like in my mind, that was always in the back of my mind. So, like when the shot came, I thought, I understood completely what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I jumped right into it. So when I came back to the mainland, besides for doing the album cover, they did a lot of advertising art.
Mm-hmm. Any pieces you're most proud of or that stand out to you?
Most of the stuff just like faded into the woodwork. I mean, they would pay like $10,000 to do a baseball. And then they would have it like on a Dodger billboard or something like that. So a lot of that stuff just becomes like a piece of something else.
Sure.
I got kind of tired of it. I did a lot of magazine illustration, like I did, a thing for Timothy Leary, but mostly men's magazines. Men's magazines were paying a lot more, and they were doing like big double truck spreads. So there was like an article about Timothy Leary after he got out of prison. He'd written an article about his experiences in prison, so I illustrated that for, I think, We Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of stuff for We Magazine and different magazines and worked for a lot of art directors.
Mm-hmm.
But some of those things kind of stood out. But still, they were just sophisticated illustrations.
Yeah. Did you have mentors helping you figure this stuff out, or were you just completely on your own?
I met a lot of really good art directors. I mean, Dean Torrance from Jan and Dean. Him and I like hit it off really well when I came back from Hawaii, and I did the Beach Boys stuff with him and some of his stuff.
Was there anything that he taught you that?
I would say everybody along the way actually taught me things. I mean, you're wondering like where did I learn these techniques?
Yeah, I mean, not so much the art techniques, but more just how to think about your business and your brand and your, where you're going. Like, are you just, are you figuring that out all on your own, or I'm always curious about the help we get along the way.
I would say that everybody that I work with actually helped me quite a bit, and I probably picked their brains for like every possible detail. I mean, anytime I went into something, say for instance, if I went into a print shop and I had a print job, I would try to learn like everything there was about printing, every detail about it. So when I met Rick, for instance, the first thing I asked him was like how he did the color separations on his poster, because I couldn't figure out, like, from what I knew, how these things were done.
Yeah. And
he showed me this technique that was like where he got like these blue lines. For instance, he did his entire thing in black and white, right? Then he would send it up to San Francisco, and they had this oscillus machine at a big print shop up there that could make a blueprint reproduction of his drawing that didn't shrink. Like previously, all blueprint drawings shrunk slightly, so it made it impossible to do these things. So what he'd do is he'd put registration marks on his black and white, and he'd get 4 pieces back. Then he was able to draw like on every one of those pieces and send the whole mess to the printers, and they were able to line up everything. And that's how he created those like beautiful like Grateful Dead album covers with like all those Ben-Day
Different
screens,
layers,
like going. You know?
Yeah.
And he also told me about this little plastic thing where it had like all the Ben-Day screens in like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever the percentage were. And you could pull them out and you could lay them on top of one another. So when you're like doing this thing, you'd know exactly what angle to put the screens on top of one another, so when they laid, they wouldn't create like a moire pattern. That was another thing I couldn't figure out, is how you could like mix these screens together without getting crazy moires, you know?
Right.
So there's like 2 techniques he taught me that I used probably all through the 70s
Wow.
to do really sophisticated color separations.
Yeah.
And I say everybody I met probably taught me something, and in most cases I used it. I mean, like Robert Williams, like I was way into like rapidograph pens, like we're in my rapidograph pen. So then I did a comic jam with him, and I see him with this brush, and he's like doing the shit with the brush, and I'm like, dude, where does that brush? You know, how do you do that? And he's like, sounds like a Thayer Chandler, double aughts, like all this. So I immediately went to the art store and bought a Thayer Chandler double aught, loaded it up. I couldn't do anything with it, but I just like tried over and over and over again to get that sophisticated line that I saw, and I did it. I mean, then I end up,
Finally got it.
yeah. And so you see in the TAZ posters, all of it is all done with the brush.
Yeah, man.
Eddie, who's been mentors for you, and what's somebody taught you?
I don't know. I think Danny Boy was probably a big influence in my life. He was a genius at, connecting people and the dots and seeing the future. And I kind of got with him, and that's kind of where I kind of think I took off the most, kind of got into marketing through him. And then, I don't know, Jim's an influence on me too. Like watching him work is amazing, and kind of how he breaks things down.
How'd you guys meet?
I think Benyard took me to Atomic Pop for a job, like a street team job, or James Lopez actually took me over there, I think, to do a street team job, and he was a creative director at the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was a funny place because they brought all these young guys in, like him and what's his name from Seventh Letter?
Casey.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Casey actually did like a piece of graffiti for me.
Way
is
back
that right?
in the day, a little
Yeah.
TAZ piece. He still has it, right?
Yeah.
Or you have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the Atomic Pop days. I came close to doing a deal with Al.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what it was. Something with
Right.
Raymond.
For who?
It might have been Herb Music we were trying to
Put
launch
through
at the
channel.
time.
Yeah. I
Or
was at Dan across the street.
yeah,
so-
yeah. And then you brought us in
Patty
at Dan.
Yeah.
I think
What
we
did we
went. I think we didn't do anything because they went out of business. But
Like
we
the
got
next
close.
day.
Yeah. Like we're like having a meeting with them. They're going to send us an offer, and then we get a call probably from Eddie that like fire sale on their furniture. Like, let's run
By the
over
way,
there.
Gary Gersh is announcing tomorrow that we're closing.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Crazy times. But I think it's interesting. I'm curious to know for you, you go from creating these, iconic pieces of art that are going to live forever on album covers or in logos or on posters, to the digital era where everything is very functional. It's also very fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does that change your approach?
Well, that fire I told you about had something to do with it.
Yeah, sure.
That probably pushed me into that approach a little bit more. I would have probably gone a lot slower, since my natural thing is not to play with computers. But I was fascinated about what computers do.
Yeah.
Although the fact that it is so fleeting and ephemeral, that bothers me. But it
Yeah.
kind of bothers me in the back of my mind. There's not anything I can do about it exactly. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I mean, you think about like all the photos that your parents have, like from the 30s and 40s and 50s, and even though they're crappy little photos, they are little photos that you
Yeah.
can still hold and are sitting in a
Forever.
shoebox somewhere in the closet.
Yeah.
I mean, like so many families now just take all that stuff and put it on whatever, you
Yeah.
know, and it's not going to be really anywhere. It's going to be on some drive that you can't even hook up to anything, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Or
that-
you can't find.
Right.
Well, I just find it, now, everything's in the cloud, but there's so many photos. Like, I have like 100,000 photos sitting on a drive, on a
Right.
cloud somewhere that I can find them. I can never have time to look through
Go
them. all.
through 'em,
Right.
yeah.
It's not like you sit the old days on the couch and flip through a photo album and reminisce. Like you sort of lose that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure I would imagine a lot of your contemporaries couldn't make that transition to digital.
Right.
Or that was really hard for them, right? Because it's a different thought process. It's probably a different motivation. So was that a struggle for you, or like, I mean, as you said, there's a fire that sort of wiped away a lot of the physical evidence.
I wouldn't say it was a struggle. I mean, I haven't had a hard time ever, like, for me the future is always better than the past just because it's the future. So I don't have a hard time like really accepting the future under any circumstances, even if it's not like, I don't really look back at the past and say, wow, it was like, really pretty cool when I was living on the beach in Hawaii. I wish I could have lived like that for eternity. I really couldn't. I could have if I wanted to, but I didn't want to.
So did you learn that somewhere, or has that just been with you from birth?
What I just said?
Yeah, to be more excited about the future than the past.
I just always have been. I'm not sure exactly why. It's been easy for me. So it's like people say, like, how can you change so easily? It's like, it's easy because, it's like new music. Even though like I'll listen to music and I say, wow, I'm completely familiar with that music. I can still like appreciate like the fact that the guy was born like in 1989 or something like that is making the music. So like he's listening to music that was like old a long time ago. So it's not really, you got to like listen to things with new ears and see it with new eyes, or else you can't really possibly grow. I mean, and growth in terms of like age is not easy for people to do. I mean, I think the natural thing is for people to like stop growing. They just get like kind of crabby, and it's like, well, everybody's listening to this music and that kind of sucks, and it's like now they're putting everything on, and plus these things here, like what the hell are these? What?
Right.
So
Sounds like me.
Huh?
Sounds like me.
Well, there's a lot of evidence, or some evidence, that like your music taste freezes at 26.
Yeah.
For the average person, and you're like, and you're like
just getting going.
You kind of learn new stuff, but you're locked into like, this is my music, right? Of whatever that is. That's why there's classic rock. That's why there's now classic hip hop stations, right? And there'll be, there's the '80s classic format, right? And that all has to adapt because each new generation gets stuck in the past.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's really tempting, right? Because you got other stuff to think about.
Well, for me to rehash the past wouldn't really be, wouldn't do me any good. I mean, I got like a little box in the back of my head where I keep the junk that I need. But I mean, your head's going to be full of just crap. I mean, and you're going to fill it with new crap like all the time. So you really got to decide like what kind of crap you want in your head, Yeah. For me, I like filter the crap and just put in the stuff that I need. So the future is a fortunate place to be just because there's like fresh stuff coming in. And in order to like operate, I really have to like sort of live like I hadn't done all the other stuff before. I can't really like drag.
Nostalgia.
I can't drag the nostalgia with me. Otherwise, I mean, I can go bathe in it anytime I want to. At some point, I'm going to get really old and like sit somewhere and just like think like, dude, you used to be someone. I'll be bumping somebody like, hey, look me up online, man. That's the crazy shit I did. Yeah.
I was
like 60 years ago, but So I mean, so that the thing is, you sort of get that for free. At some point, you can't fight against the tide any longer.
Yeah.
Right. But as long as you can, you really should.
Yeah.
I think.
And what about so you had these goals, right? Like to be, to make an impact as an artist, to have your stuff seen, and you've accomplished those, as you said, really early on, and so many since then. So are there new goals? Like what propels you to keep growing?
I think it's like I guess say for instance if you're an author or something like that, and you haven't like written a book that the book you really wanted to write or something like that, or you spent all your life like writing ad copy and things like that. So I've got it's like I really haven't done exactly what I want to do, even though I've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There's like some of the things I've done with Eddie, even some of the album covers. I mean not album covers, but the posters and things like that have been exciting just because it's like a fresh approach.
Yeah. So can you talk about the stuff you guys are doing together?
Yeah, go ahead, start.
Well, I mean, we're doing a lot. I'm trying to do the best I can to bring him some cool commercial work.
Okay.
That's kind of how it started. He's like, hey, let's find some cool stuff to do. It's not about the money. It's more about the cool stuff. But right now we're working on a show with Risky, graffiti artists. They're going to collaborate. What's the name of the show?
I can't remember.
We just named it yesterday, or he named it
We'll,
yesterday.
we'll post it.
Yeah,
when
so
we
we're
get it.
doing a show with Risky. They're going to collaborate on some cool stuff at Buckshot Gallery.
And is that you guys are creating new work to show together, or is it you're showing?
Yeah, they're going to do some new stuff, some new originals, and then they're going to also show some of their older stuff as well, which I
Nice.
think is cool because if you think about it, he's such a giant, Kelly's such a giant.
Yeah.
If they, come together and start hitting heads, it could be pretty
So
magical.
something like that is exciting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you can use what you've done, and work with someone like him and create something completely new.
And then we also resurrected the pop icons
Yes.
from, when was that, 80s, right?
Yeah.
What's
the
that?
stuff I did with Richard Eduardo.
Yeah, he has a whole show of pop icons. Who is it? Frank Sinatra, Elvis? No.
Yeah.
These are like
Marilyn Monroe.
portraits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like total 80s,
Sure.
cool, big, fun stuff. We
All silkscreen
resurrected
stuff.
and
Nice.
have a show in Dallas now. We did
Oh,
a show in Palm Springs during Modernism Week. So that was fun, right? To see
Yeah,
that
but that was
stuff
just a
again.
bunch of stuff that was like sitting in the closet, and Eddie discovered it when he was up looking at some posters.
Yeah.
He just saw like this Marilyn Monroe, and he goes, "What the hell is that?" You know?
Jimi Hendrix, Billy Idol,
Right.
Sylvester Stallone,
Yeah, did a lot of stuff.
Apollonia, or who was, what's the girl's name?
Oh,
The singer, she was a Laker girl or something. was
Right,
she?
right.
Paula Abdul.
Paul Abdul is a
Right.
record girl.
Yeah, that's who it was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was like a 4-year period of time where I did all this stuff with Richard, and
Yeah.
we had a hookup with Playboy magazine where they were having us do illustrations. We did some album covers. We did we did things for Madonna and different people for special events, and plus we had galleries that were like showing the work. So for like a short period of time, I worked with Richard downtown, and we just cranked out these personality pieces. It was almost like a chunk of the '80s, and it changed me completely. And
Yeah.
I don't know where it sent him.
And it's cool. It's cool work too. Like it's
Yeah.
now. Like it could work now. That's what's
Yeah, we put a
crazy
lot of work
about
into it.
It's kind of
Nice.
timeless.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about this era when magazines were so influential, and I think that's certainly over.
Yeah.
What do you look to now for inspiration or for to kind of inform your work?
I mean, right now, I guess what I like is the fact that almost from the aspect of like what is referential, almost anything goes. There's really not like I went through the period of time like starting in probably like my brain career like started in the early 60s or
Right.
mid 60s, started rolling, but like everything moved along at that time as like a chunk of pop culture that would like have a beginning, middle, and an end, and then the end would like fade out, and then everything from that particular period would be old and like uncool, and all the new stuff would be new and cool.
Right.
And then you just went from era to era to era, and finally it's like that has like faded away and become like amorphous in a way that like everything almost exists simultaneously. So I'm fascinated now because I can almost choose anything from any period and utilize it, and it kind of fits.
Right.
I mean, the mind of the consumer and the visual mind of the young people that are looking at things, either movies or listening to pop music, is almost like more wide open than it ever has been. Like maybe less judgmental, and like people could say like, well, because they like see so much stuff, they don't know what they're looking at. Maybe, but at the same time, they're actually looking at more stuff and they're absorbing more stuff. So you can
Right.
you can bring something from almost any place. You can say almost anything you want to say, and people seem to be kind of open to the idea. I mean, so I'd say that there's more fresh ideas. I mean, there's really more music now than there ever has been in some ways. I mean,
Absolutely.
and like everything is good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff is good, but I mean, not that like the Foo Fighters are like the biggest band in the world, but still they're making still making good music.
Right.
Beyonce's doing what she's doing. I mean, you got a lot of people doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I would say that I get excited by the fact that it's sort of we live in a democracy of imagery at the moment.
Well, we do, and I think that has interesting implications for your business, right? Because, it used to be necessary to have somebody like you to create the album artwork, the poster, whatever. Now, every kid has, a
Photoshop,
design studio
phone, yeah.
Right.
in their pocket, and there's, Canva, and there's all these free tools or whatever, and it's, I would say it's easy to make stuff that's good enough.
Right.
And so, my question is, how does that change the game for you? How do you stay, I don't know if competitive is the right word, but how do you sort of differentiate yourself in that environment?
Well, I mean, the lucky thing for me now is I've got like this giant body of work behind me, so I'm not like having to like start from scratch and like compete head to head with all these people.
Right.
Right. So when they look at it, they see all this other stuff. So I become like the sum total of everything I've done up to this point, rather than just me.
Yeah.
So that makes one part of it easier. I mean, I look at someone like Grimes, and I get fascinated because she seems like a shut-in who does interesting artwork, makes really interesting music, has like created her own computer out of her bedroom, and like done really, really well with it. And I've actually paid money for her albums and listened to them. So something like that like inspires me. Like it doesn't help my career at all, but at the same time, it inspires me to think that like that there's people like that now everywhere doing that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Multi-level creative.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's always a market for someone who has a unique vision, I think, no matter what.
Right.
You know, be it in music, be it in writing, or be it in art. So
I don't know how much you talk to young artists coming up, trying to find their way. I'm sure you do. And obviously that journey is very different they're facing than what you faced in decades past, right? So what do you, either one of you, what do you tell artists that are, young guys today trying to make their way in a career making art?
It's a big question. I mean, for me, it's mostly like these street art graffiti kids that are trying to figure out how to break out. Yeah. And I suggest them to not even try at this point, because I think it's kind of, I mean, the whole thought process behind it's different. Now it's like I'm doing this to get famous so I can sell my work, instead of I'm doing this from a passionate place and I want to be better than the next guy. You know what I mean?
So stay in the streets, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, kids come to me, how can I be the best graffiti artist? How can I get known? And it's like, with what these kids are doing nowadays, you can't beat the Zesses and the Sabers and the Revokes. Like, no graffiti artist is ever going to come up with anything as cool as the stuff that they've done. So I just tell them, try something else. And it's unfortunate.
Do you mean try something? Do you mean try a different career, or do you mean
Yeah, for me, I'm getting a lot of kids that are trying to get into that lane when the lane is already closing.
Sure.
I don't deal with a lot of like graphic designers.
Who's the last artist you've seen come up that has opened up a lane for themselves?
I mean, there's a lot, but that I like, I would say Retina.
Okay.
I like what Retina's done. I think he's gonna.
But he's not a young guy.
Well,
I mean, not to call him out, but he's
fairly so, considering the, his body of work, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is his first kind of run with what he's doing now.
Okay.
I'm sure he's going to have a couple other ones if he sticks around. Like, this is his style now. It's going to morph into this, and then it's going to be that.
But I think of Shepard in a way.
Shepard too
created a new style of art, right? Or he created a lane for that art. He wasn't the first guy doing it.
Not at all.
But he was the first guy to take that and make it into a business.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And
good business too.
And so then people have followed him. So now there's a bunch of wannabe Shepards, right? Because he was able to have that success. So I'm curious, like he's the last guy I think of to kind of open a lane in that sense, in the way that the graffiti guys did, or in the way that you and your contemporaries did, right? In terms of creating something that, from a business perspective, wasn't really there before.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody besides like Redner or Shepard. I mean, you think about Dabs and Mila, they have that cartoony style, but a lot of people do that. They're probably at the forefront of that right now in popularity.
Yeah. So back to my question about music, like, can you do that in art? Can you blow the doors open again? I
mean, look at Shepard. Shepard, the thing that makes Shepard dangerous, or dangerous in terms of like, say if art is like a weaponized concept, the idea that an artist is a warrior of some kind or another, as opposed to just like somebody who just draws pictures. Like, you're talking about like somebody that's like going to go out and thrust himself into like the pop culture consciousness. Yeah. So at that point, then you become like a bit of a warrior. You grab your sword or your pen or whatever it is like that, and you head out and do battle with all the other gladiators that are like doing battle. Like, Shepard came into the thing, and at first all he had was that dumb little sticker, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing about Shepard is the guy has a philosophy, like a really deep-seated philosophy, and believes like not only in what he does, but he knows how to like be lucid about that. Yeah. How to write things about it, how to like build like an entire empire of words and concepts around like everything he does. So he didn't have to do very much in the beginning. And the fact is, he hasn't really changed his style. I mean, you talk about sticking to the style. he's like done like a bazillion variations on one single style,
Right. Yeah.
and like done it kind of
And people
brilliantly.
are still loving it.
Huh?
It's
And
great.
people are still
Yeah,
loving
people
it.
want it. Yeah.
So when you got that, it would be idiotic for him to try to break out of it, because it is, it is what it is.
I mean, he has kind of evolved, though. He's got textures, and he does the collage stuff in the
Right.
back, so it's not so two-dimensional or one-dimensional, So he is kind of growing in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that a little bit, like, I follow Shepherd, pretty closely. But, I think about, it struck me because I have seen a little bit of evolution. I think in some ways it's still very much the same thing, but it's definitely evolved. But, you think about him relative to like a Picasso who has these periods, right? And where everyone hates the new thing, and then they come to love it, and then they,
Right. And he moves
and
on,
you reinvent and all that stuff. And that kind of makes me wonder, like, does that happen for a Shepherd or for a Futura or for a Hayes, right? Can these guys build these multi-decade careers where they're sort of constantly reinventing their style? And I think, again, you've done that in many ways, but as you said, you're a commercial artist, right? And so you're responding to the client,
Right.
Or to the piece of work that you're being given to
Yeah,
build
but the
off.
stuff he's doing now for himself is definitely different than the stuff he was doing 10 years ago. It's like
Sure.
it's more psychedelic. He's getting real psychedelic with the patterns and the layers and the stuff that he's doing. Like, I'm always trying to get him to simple down a little bit, because we can't really see what you see. We're not ready for that yet. So he's definitely different as well than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So what you were saying is like, where would I develop from here? I'd probably like into fine art, like actually doing something that I felt like doing, as opposed to doing something on
Yeah.
command.
Yeah. Is
That's
that
what I've
harder?
always done. I think so, yeah. Because I mean, as an artist, I can sit down and do almost anything I want to do, but like, exactly what do I want to do?
Yeah.
I mean, so for a lot of decades, I haven't really,
Been able
doodle.
to do what you want to do.
No, I mean, when I talk on the phone, I doodle. So I've got like books of like weird little doodles and things like that. So you can
Sell
say
those.
that's like sort of my natural style, right?
Yeah.
And they're like little monsters and cartoony things and strange cities and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So let's do a book.
A book of doodles.
Yeah. Jim Evans Doodles.
But yeah, I think that the thing most impressive about Shepherd, though, is the fact that he knows exactly what he wants to do, and he's able to talk about it
Yeah.
and do it.
Yep.
I mean, for me, I think the biggest thing is the buildings. Like, now it's buildings, it's not walls.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Retina did the American Apparel building, and that's a monster. And Shepherd's doing 5, 6, 8 stories, murals. I think that, to me, is one of the most exciting progressions of the art form, whether it be street art or graffiti or graphic design. It's like to drive down the street and see these murals. To me, is pretty.
And there's not such a big battle
impressive.
about what's fine art and what's commercial art anymore
Right.
either. I mean, there's definitely. I mean, in the '60s, there was like people getting like just knock down, drag out battles about
Sure.
the fact of like that's commercial art and that's fine art.
Is Shepherd fine art or commercial art, or both?
I mean, Shepherd comes from a commercial art background. There's no doubt about it. I mean, as a straight commercial designer, most of his stuff is like for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He loves to decorate T-shirts or like any kind of surface.
Yeah.
But he like he walks between art and commerce for sure. And he'd be like probably the best fusion artist there is in terms
Yeah.
of like people accepting him as a straight artist and even accepting his commercial work as art.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's certainly done a lot to like redefine that particular area.
Yeah, I mean, he brought the print game back in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It had kind of slowed down, and then now everyone's doing prints, and all the bands are taking prints on tour, which we're lucky to do some cool stuff lately.
Yeah, the revival of like of rock posters too is kind of interesting. When you think like it kind of faded away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the early '90s, it didn't even exist, and suddenly it existed. And it was everywhere.
What I think's fascinating is Shepherd will release them, and they'll be $40, and then 2 days later they're $400.
Of course.
It's like
That's the
you buy
magic
paper
of
to
magic
make
of
paper.
eBay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you buy paper to make paper. It's kind of crazy to think about that.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're almost out of time, and I know you guys have busy schedules to
That's
get to,
right.
but I have a
Traffic
couple
to get into.
couple last questions. What are the biggest sacrifices you've made in your career?
Probably not being able to enjoy myself as much as I'd like to. I mean, in order to do artwork, you have to like spend a lot of time by yourself just drawing. And my body naturally wants to be outside surfing or doing something else. And like I've had to force myself and trick myself and basically connive myself into like sitting at that freaking desk for like longer. I mean, it was certainly worse like in the 70s when I had like, I was like learning as I went.
Yeah.
So I was like pushing myself all the time. I mean, now I have my techniques down so I can work a lot faster. But in those days I had like, I'd have like 6 or 7 jobs at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And these were all jobs that I had to paint or draw or like logos or, things like that. Like I did a logo for Don Kirshner's rock concert. He just like calls out of the blue. Somebody says like, this guy Don Kirshner, I'd never heard of him. Have you heard?
No.
Seen? Oh, it was like a big rock concert thing in the 70s. Yeah. You can.
He was a promoter.
Huh?
He was a promoter.
He was a promoter. Yeah.
Okay.
He called me from New York.
Who played?
Huh?
Who was playing?
Everybody was on it.
Okay.
On the show?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, look it up on YouTube.
Yeah,
Don
yeah.
Kirshner's rock concert. You'll see everybody on it. But I'd never heard of this guy, and I had like already 6 other jobs, and so he calls up and he wanted a logo, and that was the way it was for almost a decade. I mean, at the end of the decade, my success had almost like completely crushed me. I mean, I didn't hardly go out much. I mean, I had to, I was always at the desk. I mean, I missed a lot of days surfing. Just, I couldn't tell whether it was day or night. I'd have to close the blinds, just because I didn't want to see the daylight anymore.
Yeah.
So I would say like having to like shut off and not do things because I had to work. I've had to work a lot harder than I thought I would.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was kind of embarrassing. I almost tried to hide it because I thought that it was kind of weird.
Right.
I could do what I wanted to do, but it took a lot longer than I thought it would.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, and I think like now we like to say how busy we are. Like that's the thing, right? Like
Right.
You go, how you doing? Oh man, I'm slammed, right?
Yeah, wow.
That's just the thing you say, But I think I think back then you kind of wanted. It was more like I'm not working that hard. Like you
Right.
kind of have to hide it.
I mean, on the other hand, like working at home or in my studio, I was able to watch my kids grow up, so I'm probably better than most dads in terms of like having been around for all their
Didn't have
games
to
and
leave
things
the
like
house.
that.
Yeah,
Huh?
didn't have to leave the house.
Right.
So have you found ways to find more of that balance now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I live in Malibu, so
Right.
I can throw my board in the car and go surfing, instead of eating lunch.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still work really hard, but I don't have to do all-nighters. I mean, in the 70s, I did all-nighters like 3 and 4 times a week.
Yeah.
I mean, my sleep patterns were like a vampire.
Sure.
It was completely inside out.
Yeah.
And also, you couldn't send everything. So
Right.
depending on where you lived, I mean, I had to actually go to meetings. So I
Yeah.
had to like go to record companies and like after having not slept all night and
Drop
drop
off
something
the
on the
work.
desk, and then the guy would look at it and he goes like, "Oh, that's great." He said, "But can you make the sky a little bit?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, okay." And that meant that I had to actually go back and repaint the sky.
Yeah. Another
And-
all-nighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on those things, it wasn't that easy because I mean, oftentimes I'd have to like basically cut out the sky and remove it from the illustration board, paint it on another thing, and then cut it out and then put it in place and then retouch
Move it
where
back
it was.
down, yeah.
I mean, that was the fastest way to do it because
Yeah.
I worked because they would have me do like a movie poster in like a weekend.
Mhm.
I mean, they would call me on Thursday and they want something on their desk on Monday.
Yeah.
And that's like pretty fast to paint a movie poster. So I painted with like dyes, airbrush and dyes and things like that and pencils. So I could work really, really fast, except that it's like merciless. I mean, if you make a mistake, it's done.
Yeah.
If you have to redo something, I mean, you basically got to cut it out because you can't get rid of the dye. Basically, the dye dyes itself right into the board. So it creates beautiful colors, but like any mistake is, say the airbrush spurts,
Mm-hmm.
mother just tear it up and throw it away.
Yeah.
And in retouch jobs, I would do like big retouch jobs, and that was the same kind of a thing. I'd have to buy like a $450 print and then retouch with one of these little tiny airbrushes to, for an album cover. And it was
Crazy.
It was crazy, yeah.
Yeah. It's if you think about how easy this stuff is now by comparison, it's unbelievable.
I mean, I felt like my hand was like as steady as like a brain surgeon.
Yeah.
I mean, because
I'm sure.
holding that thing, I mean, I could just like.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, we don't have such steady hands.
I'm good,
Yeah.
It's not bad.
but I can't draw.
So it was a give and take, but definitely that got really old. Yeah. So I was glad to move away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't have if I'd have kept that up. I'd have been dead for sure.
Well, okay. Last couple questions. For you, favorite DJ?
Damn, I would say Adam, AM,
Yep.
I think what he did was magnificent. Then I'd say probably, I'd go with AM.
Okay.
You?
Well, I mean, I always say Jeff.
Okay.
It's all Jazzy Jeff
Yeah.
for me is. But it's like there's a long list of guys that are
on that,
hugely influential.
on that one
And
spot.
then he's the one that just turns out. And so I know you're a rock guy. If you got a DJ for us, but otherwise, your favorite live show?
I mean, Grandmaster Flash, is he kind of the DJ?
Sure,
Of course.
Yeah.
can be.
I would say Grandmaster Flash was like a real life changer for me. I went to see a show when he first came to LA, and it was like one of those kind of things where you've seen the future.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what I was looking at. I walked in there and it was like a guy like standing up there with like somebody had taken like pieces of cardboard and stuff like that and painted crap all over behind him,
Yeah.
which was like obviously urban,
Right.
urban graffiti,
Sure.
but they brought it from New York and just put
Yeah.
it behind him. So it was like right up on Sunset Boulevard. And then the guy's like playing this crap on turntables, and I'm like, so where's the band?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I'd heard the music and I liked the music, but I thought
You
there was
thought
going to
there's
be
gonna
like a
some
soul
dudes
band
beating
or
on
something, right?
instruments, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just this guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
What year was that?
79, 78.
Yeah, 79.
Yeah. It was like he just brought New York to a
Yeah.
club here, and everybody was the same as me. We're just like, well, what's that?
Well, that's another one of those nights, right? That
Right.
you're like, shit's different than it was yesterday. You know.
Yeah, and that's why I said AM for me,
Yeah.
because AM brought the DJ show to another level.
Mhm.
Wasn't about cutting and scratching and transforming anymore. It was about actually combining music and mashing up, and definitely for hip hop DJ kind of took it to the next level.
Yeah.
Z-Trip as well.
Yeah.
But Z-Trip they're different. They're the same but different.
Mhm.
Hmm?
Well, thanks for being here. I'm excited to see the show and the stuff you guys are doing, and come back anytime there's something to promote. I know we're going to do more together as Rebel Radio and Guerilla One,
That's right.
so I appreciate you making this happen.
All right. It was
Nice.
fun.
Anything for Josh.
Likewise. Yes, that was the first in our ARTxWORK Rebels series in partnership with Guerilla One. Big shout out to Eddie Donaldson. Thank you for making that happen. Look for more ARTxWORK Rebels from Rebel Radio coming up. In the meantime, leave us a review on iTunes, hit us on Twitter, Facebook, visit our website, rebelradio.net. And most importantly, come back next week for more Rebel Radio. Peace.